The announcement crackled through the intercom just as I was finishing off a lukewarm cup of coffee in the break room. My hands didn't shake, my posture didn't change, but the words hit with the accuracy of a bullet. Congratulations to Ethan Ward, our new senior operations manager. A wave of applause rolled through the building, muffled by the walls. I could hear the cheers, the laughter, the clapping. Someone even whistled. I just sat there, staring at the cheap clock above the vending machine, listening to the second hand scrape its way forward like it hated the job as much as I did. My name's Ryan Hale. I'm 53 years old, and I've spent the last 25 years working at Vanguard Industrial. Started on the floor, worked my way up, ended up as training director. Every single person who's ever walked through those front doors and punched in for the first time, hundreds of them over the years, learned this place from me. I taught them everything: safety protocols, how to handle the machines, efficiency standards, the company culture. I wrote the training manuals, ran orientations, mentored rookies who later became supervisors and managers. My fingerprints are on everything in this building, even if my name never made it onto a single plaque. I never wanted fame. I wanted steadiness, something solid. For 25 years, I gave this place everything I had. Ethan Ward? He's been here 5. The first time I saw him, he was wearing a suit that looked too expensive for the job, grinning like he'd just closed a deal on a used car. His handshake told me all I needed to know: too polished, too practiced. He was smooth with the right people, quick with a joke during meetings, always had a way of drawing attention. He also made a habit of slipping out early every Friday, without fail. 3 o'clock sharp, and he'd vanish like the company clock stopped ticking just for him. Nobody ever called him out on it. Didn't need to. His reputation wasn't built on hours or hard work. It was built on charm, on the stories he told between sips of coffee and handshakes that looked good in front of management. When the applause died and the intercom clicked off, I set my cup down and let the silence sink in. 25 years of early mornings and late nights, covering shifts, training new hires, fixing the leaks no one else saw. And in the end, the guy who couldn't stick around past Friday afternoon got the job I'd been quietly aiming for all along. At first, I didn't feel angry. Not exactly. What I felt was cold and clear, like watching a car crash happen in slow motion and knowing there's nothing you can do to stop it. Betrayal doesn't kick down the door. It seeps in, slow and quiet, like water under a locked door until the floor gives out beneath you. I stayed in that chair another 5 minutes, watching the second hand circle the clock, just listening to time move. Then I stood, straightened my tie, and walked back to my office. The email took me less than 5 minutes to write. 25 years of writing reports had taught me how to be precise. No ranting, no pleading, just facts. Effective immediately, I was resigning from Vanguard Industrial after 25 years of service. I thanked them for the opportunities, listed my accomplishments without any fluff, and finished with a line that said everything I wanted it to. Congratulations to Ethan. I'm sure the company will be in good hands. I read it twice before hitting send. On the surface, it was polite, but anyone who really knew me and knew the director would feel the weight under those words. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't sarcasm. It was colder than that. It was a bullet with no sound. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and waited. The building buzzed with its usual rhythm, the hum of machines, papers shuffling, phones ringing somewhere down the hall. Shadows crept across my office window as the sun started sliding west. 10 minutes passed, then 15. By the 20-minute mark, I heard fast footsteps pounding down the hallway, heavier than usual, full of purpose. My door burst open without so much as a knock. Regional Director Gerald Knox stood there, face flushed, jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides. Normally, he was the kind of man who measured every word during meetings, but right then his voice cracked like a whip. "Not funny," he shouted. The sound ricocheted off the walls, rattled the blinds, cut right through the quiet hum of the office. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just watched him the way you'd watch a thunderstorm roll in across a desert, knowing the lightning's coming, but not sure where it's going to hit. I used to think loyalty meant something. 25 years of walking into Vanguard before sunrise, 25 years of leaving after everyone else had gone home, 25 years of training waves of new hires who came in green and left polished. I carried the company's history in my head. Faces, names, the mistakes they made, the lessons I drilled into them. When machines broke down, It was me crawling under them, elbows deep in grease. When deadlines loomed, it was me calling home to say dinner would have to wait. The director used to call me the anchor. Said I was the backbone of the place, proof that dedication still mattered. But anchors do one thing well: they hold the ship steady. And when you cut them loose, they sink. Ethan Ward never carried any weight. He floated through this place like a guest at a cocktail party. Smiles, handshakes, small talk. The kind of guy who remembered birthdays but couldn't file a safety report right to save his life. He always had an excuse ready to go. Car trouble, family emergency, a phone call that just couldn't wait. Every Friday at 3, like clockwork, his desk was empty and his jacket gone. He called it work-life balance. Around here, we called it disappearing. Nobody up top seemed to care. His laugh carried farther than his absence. Gerald Knox, the same regional director now standing red-faced in my doorway, had built his entire image on speeches about commitment. Every quarterly meeting, same line. The company rewards those who bleed for it. His voice booming across the production floor. Sacrifice, dedication, perseverance. That was the Vanguard way. You clap when they told you to. That's just how it worked around here. I'd watched men bend under that same motto until they broke. Guys who showed up on Saturdays, who watched their marriages fall apart under the weight of that so-called dedication. I'd lived it myself. And yet, when the time came to pick someone to promote, Knox didn't choose the man who bled for the company. He picked the one who never stayed long enough to see the blood dry. I didn't explode when I heard the news. Didn't slam my fists on the table or send my coffee flying at the wall. That's not who I am. The military beat that kind of reaction out of me years ago. It taught me how to stay calm, how to wait, how to think before moving. Emotion clouds judgment. That's something I've always believed. So instead of blowing up, I started watching. I started collecting. Like recon work, quiet, patient, precise. Small things at first. Patterns most people wouldn't even notice. There was the time Ethan signed off on an inspection I'd completed, sticking his name on the report as if he'd run the tests himself. I let it slide. Made a note. Saved the email. Then came the night shift incident. A machine jammed. Production halted. Ethan's report said he stayed late to oversee the repair. He hadn't. I was there. He'd left hours before. I documented that too. Reports, emails, timestamps. Each one small on its own, but together they started to stack up, neat and heavy, like rounds in a magazine. And then there was the trainee who botched a calibration. Instead of owning it, Ethan passed the blame. Wrote in his report that I'd skipped that procedure during orientation. Thought I wouldn't see it. Thought no one double-checked those files. He was wrong. I printed it out, slipped it into a folder, and added it to the growing pile. My silence wasn't compliance. It was strategy. It was patience. Long before the announcement came over that intercom, I knew Knox wasn't blind. He saw the same things I did. The shortcuts, the early departures, but charm blinds faster than incompetence does. And Ethan was a charming man. He had a way of making people feel seen, like they mattered. Gerald wasn't immune to that. I almost respected it, almost. But respect isn't free. And charm's a currency I don't deal in. So when I sent that resignation email, Gerald didn't just see a polite farewell. He saw 25 years' worth of documentation staring him down. Evidence tucked neatly behind my calm expression. Proof of every corner cut, every false report he'd quietly let slide. That's why his face turned red when he stormed into my office. That's why his voice cracked when he started shouting. The second he read that email, he knew what else I had sitting in my files. And that's when the yelling began. Gerald slammed the door behind him hard enough to rattle the blinds. His face was flushed, his tie crooked like he'd sprinted all the way down the hall. He didn't sit. He hovered over my desk, jabbing a finger toward the printed resignation lying between us. "You're not serious about this," he barked, his tone missing that usual authority he loved to wield. "You can't be. 25 years, Ryan, and you're going to throw it all away with some petty stunt?" I leaned back in my chair, hands folded like I was about to debrief a trainee after a long shift. His words rolled over me, but it wasn't anger I heard. It was panic. The tremor in his voice, the sweat glistening at his temple, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the email still glowing on my screen. I'd seen fear before, on training grounds, in hospital waiting rooms, in the quiet before bad news. And that same look was written all over Gerald's face now. A man who'd built his life on control, suddenly realizing he didn't have any left. He tried again, lowering his voice this time, reaching for some false sense of camaraderie. Ryan, come on now. Let's not overreact. You've been invaluable to this company. We both know that. This promotion, it's not the end of the line for you. We can talk about other opportunities. His words sounded practiced, like he'd said them in the mirror a dozen times. But the rhythm was off. Each sentence stumbled a little more, stripped of confidence by the second. I didn't answer. Silence, when used right, can hit harder than any speech. So I just watched him, let him twist in it. Truth was, my decision had been made the second that intercom announcement ended. This wasn't about a title, it was about betrayal. Pure and simple. As he kept talking, his voice started to fade into the background. My mind wandered. I thought about all the birthdays I'd missed, the anniversaries I'd cut short, the Little League games where my seat stayed empty. All those moments I'd traded for loyalty. I told myself it was worth it. That one day the company would look back and see the weight I'd carried, the hours I'd given, the fires I'd put out. That illusion was gone now, shattered in the space of one promotion. In the military, betrayal could get people killed. Here, it just killed years. Years I'd never get back. Gerald's voice snapped me out of it. He was pacing now, agitation leaking through every word. You don't want to go down this road, Ryan. You don't want to drag this company through the mud. Think about your reputation. Think about the bridges you'll burn. It wasn't a threat, it was a plea. The man was desperate, trying to regain ground he'd already lost. The truth was, I didn't need to drag anything anywhere. The mud was already thick on everything, caked onto files, buried in records nobody bothered to check. But I had. Long nights alone in that office had their advantages. You start to notice things when no one's around. Discrepancies. Hour logs that didn't line up. Projects Ethan supposedly led while I knew for a fact he wasn't even in the building. So I got curious. I dug deeper. Audit trails don't lie. Software logs showed Ethan's name stamped on reports I'd written, time entries backdated, his fingerprints all over accomplishments he never earned. And every single time, I saved the evidence. Quietly, methodically, not out of spite, never that. Out of discipline, not at first. Back then, it wasn't some grand plan, just instinct. A habit from years of documenting everything, of keeping records because it felt like armor. But the day Gerald pinned a medal on Ethan's chest for work he never actually did, I knew those files might matter someday. That day had finally come. When I looked at Gerald, I could see it dawning on him. Piece by piece, the understanding settling into his face like frost. He wasn't staring at a simple resignation anymore. He was staring at a fuse that had already been lit, the spark inching closer to the dynamite. He pressed both hands on my desk and leaned in, his voice dropping low, almost a growl. What do you want, Ryan? You want me to reverse the decision? You want me to humiliate myself in front of the board? I shook my head slowly, my eyes steady, the way a marksman lines up his shot before pulling the trigger. I didn't come here to ask for my job back, I said, each word deliberate and cold. I came here to watch the truth take your house down, brick by brick. His breath caught, and for a moment the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the air conditioner. I could see the storm gathering behind his eyes, the realization of just how much damage I could do. But I didn't flinch. The rifle was already sighted in, and the target was fixed. The next morning, I sat at my desk with the same discipline that had carried me through 25 years at Vanguard. The difference was, this time, I wasn't building training programs or drafting schedules. I was preparing an extraction. I opened a new email, this one careful, surgical, not emotional. Every line measured like coordinates. It wasn't just addressed to Gerald. I copied corporate headquarters, compliance, HR, and every board member whose email I had saved over the years. Attached was a single folder, years' worth of documentation. Time-stamped emails, fabricated reports, attendance logs, audit trails that charm couldn't rewrite and excuses couldn't erase. The subject line was plain, resignation and documentation of concerns. When I hovered over the send button, I didn't hesitate. My finger pressed down with the same certainty as pulling a trigger. And just like that, the message was gone. Along with it, the last thread tying me to Vanguard Industrial. I leaned back in my chair and waited. The clock on the wall ticked steady as ever, but something in the air outside shifted. Phones started ringing more often. Footsteps picked up speed. Conversations turned into whispers. By noon, HR had called an emergency meeting. Clusters of employees gathered in corners, their eyes darting toward Ethan's office, blinds half drawn, voices raised inside. The steady hum that had filled this building for decades was gone, replaced by a heavy quiet, the kind that comes before thunder breaks. Gerald came by twice that afternoon. The first time, he was still loud, blustering, waving his arms, telling me I'd misunderstood, that I needed to retract my email before it did damage. I didn't argue. I just slid a single printed page across the desk, a log showing Ethan signing off on reports from home at the exact times he'd claimed to be on site. Gerald didn't take it. He just stared at the page for a long moment, his jaw tight, then turned and left without another word. When he came back the second time, the fire was gone from his voice. He stood in the doorway, shoulders sagging, tie loosened, looking every bit like a man unraveling. "Ryan," he said quietly, "this isn't good for anyone. You've made your point. Let's talk about what it'll take for you to stay quiet." There was no anger left in him, only desperation. And in that moment, everything became clear. It was never about me. It was about him, about saving himself. The man who once stood in front of hundreds preaching sacrifice and loyalty was now reduced to bargaining behind a half-closed door. I met his eyes and didn't say a word. Silence has weight if you know how to use it, heavier than any accusation. And in that silence, he understood exactly what I wasn't going to say. By mid-afternoon, panic had taken root. HR staff hustled between conference rooms with thick folders clutched to their chests. Compliance officers from headquarters arrived earlier than anyone expected, their faces hard, their pace sharp. Word travels fast in places like this. The same people who used to laugh at Ethan's jokes now avoided even looking at him. The men who used to clap him on the back in the cafeteria now whispered behind his shoulders. Through it all, I stayed calm. My movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. I pulled a cardboard box from the supply closet, set it on my desk, and started packing. A framed photo of my wife and son. My old coffee mug, stained by decades of mornings. The worn training manuals I'd written by hand. Each item went in with the precision of a soldier packing his gear before a deployment. Cold, efficient, detached. I didn't rush. I wanted to hear the quiet settle around me as the last pieces of my career went into that box. Through the glass wall across the hall, I caught glimpses of Ethan and Gerald, their silhouettes framed by half-closed blinds, locked in a heated argument. Ethan's face was pale, hands slicing the air in frantic gestures. Gerald looked years older, his shoulders slumped under the weight of every shortcut he'd ignored. When the box was full, I lifted it easily. 25 years of work reduced to something that fit in my arms. I didn't look back at my desk. I didn't need to. The truth was already out there, sitting in inboxes that couldn't be ignored. As I walked down the hallway, the hush of whispered conversations followed me. But I didn't slow down. I passed Ethan's office one last time. Through the blinds, I could see them still arguing. Two men trying to save a house already burning. And all I had to do was keep walking. The investigation didn't take long. Once the board had my files, the machinery of corporate compliance came down hard, swift, unrelenting, and final. For years, the company had been content to look away, to pretend the numbers balanced, the reports matched, the hours logged were real. But now, every discrepancy I documented was being dissected by people whose livelihoods depended on finding fraud. Ethan's name appeared again and again where it didn't belong. Reports signed under his account when the system showed he wasn't even logged in. Project credits quietly reassigned to him after submission. Attendance logs proving he'd clocked out early on nights he later claimed overtime. One error might have been dismissed. Together, they formed a noose. 2 weeks later, the board reconvened, and the walls finally gave way. Ethan was summoned first. The charm he wore like armor cracked under the weight of hard evidence. Witnesses came forward, employees who'd covered his shifts, fixed his mistakes, cleaned up the mess he left behind. One by one, they spoke, and the mask slipped further. By the time the final report was read, his face had gone gray. The language was clinical: falsification of records, misrepresentation of work, violation of company policy. But everyone in that room knew what it really meant: fraud, theft, betrayal. His career ended before he even stood up. He left the building with his own box in hand, the whispers following him down the hall. Gerald wasn't far behind. He tried to paint himself as a victim, claimed he'd been deceived, that he hadn't known. But compliance dug deeper than I ever expected. The emails told the truth. He'd been warned. He'd seen the flags. He'd buried them. He hadn't been fooled. He'd enabled it. The board didn't hesitate. Resignation effective immediately. No arguments this time. No shouting. Just a man being walked out by security, tie loose, face pale. 25 years of image erased in a single meeting. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to be. A quiet call from compliance was enough. A polite thank you for my integrity, for coming forward. They didn't use the word revenge. But that's what it was. A system that had betrayed me from within, undone by the truth it ignored. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long while. The weight of 25 years finally lifted. Weeks passed. The company moved on. New names filled the directory. New leaders, new slogans, same machine. But the ghosts were gone. Ethan's name was scrubbed from every file, every wall, every story told over coffee. Gerald's office was emptied, his portrait pulled from the conference room. It was as if they'd never existed. I still remember the last sound I heard in that building. Gerald's voice breaking, shouting, not funny, as if my resignation had been a joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was the beginning of the end. His screams were the last echo of the old order. Weeks later, his name vanished from the system, and silence took its place. There was satisfaction in that silence. Not triumph, but completion. Betrayal doesn't always end with fists or shouting. Sometimes it ends with an empty chair. Sometimes with the quiet collapse of men who thought they'd never fall. Because betrayal always destroys itself in the end. And revenge, if you're patient enough, is nothing more than letting the truth finish the job.